Hello and welcome to CHSG History, the podcast where we uncover the most fascinating people and events from the past, all brought to you by the students here at CHSG. I'm Kalechi.
And I'm Annabelle.
And I'm Sienna, and we're your hosts for today's episode.
In this episode, we're diving into the incredible stories from history. A big focus today is on science and human drama of radioactivity, featuring the groundbreaking work of Marie Curie and the powerful, tragic story of the Radium Girls.
But that's not all. We've also got more features on other amazing individuals and moments in history that shaped the world as we know it. This episode is packed with inspiration, intrigue, and maybe a few surprises along the way.
So, whether you're a history expert or just curious about the past, settle in and get ready to explore amazing stories from the past that still matter today.
Let's jump right in and start with our first feature. This one's all about a true magnificent monarch.
Yes, that's right. The monarch in question is Queen Victoria, who ruled Britain for most of the 19th century. Stay tuned because this is going to be a journey through history like no other.
Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about Queen Victoria's trials and tribulations. In other words, her childhood and relationships growing up.
However, you might find that you didn't know everything that we're about to tell you.
Yes, so let's get started. I'm Isha.
I'm Cecilia, and welcome to the podcast.
So Cecilia, I've been very curious about what you found out about Queen Victoria's childhood. That she had a luxurious life like most monarchs growing up in massive castles?
Well, actually, she had quite a depressing childhood.
Alright, well what about her childhood was depressing? I'm sure it can't have been that bad.
Well, there was this thing called the Kensington system, and it was designed by her mother because she was concerned about her daughter's upbringing.
Well, that must have been really lonely. I'm glad she had Albert. Speaking of Albert, can you tell me more about him?
Right, well, to start, she had 9 children with him.
Wait, I think I can name them all. Victoria, Edward, Alice, Alfred, Helena, Louis, Arthur, Leopold, and Beatrice.
Wow, I was just going to Google that, but it sounded like you had that prepared.
Sounds like they were really close. Speaking of close, have you ever heard of Abdul Karim?
Actually, no. Maybe you could tell me something about him?
Well, in the last 13 years of Queen Victoria's life, she spent a great deal of time with Abdul Karim, who came from India initially to wait on the Queen's table.
Does that mean that she ignored stereotypes about herself and other people?
Yes, and speaking about stereotypes, how old was she when she became queen again?
She was 18 and her coronation was in June 1837, and then she went to marry Prince Albert 3 years later.
And what happened when he died in 1861?
Well, sadly, after he died, she suffered from sleepiness, pains, depression, or menopause if she had little too much to drink.
What about how she acted around the public?
Well, for starters, there was definitely more public appearances before he died, and she focused more on women's rights after.
Well, I think we've covered everything.
Thank you for listening. See you in our next episode where we'll be talking about 5 things you didn't know about Hitler.
Next up, we're spotlighting a queen whose story is often overshadowed by Henry VIII's many wives, Katherine of Aragon.
She's often remembered as the devoted first wife who refused to step aside. But there's so much more to her than that. What is there that we don't know about her?
In this segment, we're uncovering some untold secrets of Katherine of Aragon, a queen who is far more powerful and complex than history often gives her credit for. Let's dive in.
Hey everybody, today we are diving into the life of Katherine of Aragon, a resilient and unique queen whose determination shaped the course of history and left a lasting mark on the Tudor dynasty.
Absolutely. Katherine of Aragon is a fascinating queen, given the male-dominated world she held power in. From her early days as the daughter of the Spanish monarchs to her marriage with Henry VIII, she navigated challenges that would define her legacy. Join us as we discover 5 things you didn't know about this astonishing queen.
First off, did you know that before marrying Henry, Katherine was actually married to his older brother?
Yes, that's right. Katherine was married to Arthur, Prince of Wales, at 15 after being engaged since they were 3. Unfortunately, Arthur died a few months afterwards of sweating sickness.
Shortly afterwards, though, in an attempt to secure his money, Henry VII nearly married Catherine himself. Thank God for her father, the King of Spain, as he called off the deal.
It was only then when she finally married to Henry VIII, younger brother of Arthur, after gaining permission from the Pope. But then he divorced her, but that's not new in knowledge to most.
For sure. Secondly, did you know Catherine was running England during a major battle success?
That's correct. Henry was away fighting different battles in France, leaving Catherine as acting queen during the Battle of Flodden with Scotland. Thankfully, the battle was a major success, with the King of Scotland being killed, allowing Catherine to deliver positive news to her husband.
She slayed that, just like the King of Scotland got slayed.
Right? And thirdly, many people think they know what happened during the divorce, but did you know that divorce wasn't the first option for ending the marriage?
No way. What actually happened?
Yes, Catherine was originally asked to devote herself to God and join a nunnery. Becoming a nun would mean that Catherine would have to give up her marriage, allowing Henry to move on to marry Anne Boleyn. That's wild.
Then, once that plan failed and the divorce was the only option, Catherine was determined not to let Henry win. This led her to throw herself on the floor during the court case, even being charged with contempt of court. Mary, her daughter, was also used against her, but Catherine even preferred to never see her daughter again in order to prove her innocence.
Not see her own daughter. That's commitment. Next, after Catherine's famous divorce from Henry, do you actually know what happened to her afterwards?
Catherine was sent to live in a less comfortable conditions, which is quite a contrast from her previous life in palaces. Unfortunately, she died shortly afterwards in 1536, but the causes of this are up to debate. She probably died of cancer, but the findings of her post-mortem are kept secret, which only fueled Tudor gossip. Rumours circulated that she was poisoned.
Henry even threw a banquet to celebrate her death.
Bit harsh. Lastly, to conclude the 5 things you didn't know, did you know that Katherine of Aragon didn't just rule with grace? She had a pet monkey to keep things a little more lively at court. Talk about swinging into royal life with a bit of extra flair.
Correct. Catherine's monkey was a Panamanian white-faced capuchin monkey, which was largely found in Central and South America. In Christian iconography, monkeys are a symbol of greed and ambition, all negative traits of women at the time.
The monkey was 22 inches tall. Quite impressive.
Added to the feud, Anne Boleyn reportedly did not like monkeys, which may have been due to Catherine's love for her pet. The monkey even dressed for court, wearing a belt sometimes, to which Catherine could add a leash to stop it wandering off.
That's all for Katherine of Aragon today. We hoped you enjoyed it and found some new and interesting information to tell your friends. Remember to tune in next time to find out some more facts about people you thought you knew.
Next up, I think it's time for Historical First. What's this part of the podcast about?
Okay, this next part of the podcast is about someone who was the first person on Earth to do something incredible.
I've got a feeling that this will be my favourite bit of today's episode.
You could be right there. Let's see what the Historical First team have got in store for us. Welcome to the SKBS History Podcast. Today we're going to be discussing about Historical First.
Especially, we'll be looking at the first woman to receive a Nobel Prize, Marie Curie.
Yes, this is an important milestone for women that should be celebrated. Let's investigate her work.
Maria Skłodowska was born on the 7th of November 1867 in Warszawa, Poland.
She wanted to attend a university or craft course, but at the time no girls were allowed. But she went to Sorbonne University in Paris and eventually got her degree, top of her class. Interesting. Can you tell me more about her discoveries?
Marie Curie discovered 2 new elements, polonium, Vla, and radium, Ra. In 1898, Marie Curie published convincing evidence proving the existence of a new element they called radium.
She took part in World War I, didn't she? Tell me more. Marie Curie took part in war by promoting X-rays. She developed radiological cars, which later became known as petit Curies, to allow battlefield surgeries to X-ray wounded soldiers.
And she died from aplastic anemia radiation poisoning on the 4th of July in 1934.
Do you all want to hear some fun facts?
Yes!
She did not get her dream job.
Oh, that's sad!
She was the first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes.
Wow, that's impressive.
Marie Curie had a pet tiger named X-ray.
She enjoyed swimming and cycling.
Me too. She only ate bread and butter and drank tea.
How did she survive?
Guess we'll
never know.
welcome to the second instalment of the Biggest Mistakes in History, part of the CHSG History podcast. I'm Grace, joined today by Eliza, to discuss the horrors of the lives of the Radium Girls. This is a subtle link to another section of our podcast focusing on the life of Mary Curie and her discoveries. This is not a well-known topic, so could you introduce it to us, Eliza?
It's wonderful to be here, and of course I can introduce the topic. The Radium Girls were a large group of girls across the US who worked with radium shortly after its discovery during World War I. They ended up greatly harmed by this work due to the dangerous radioactivity properties it held.
Why would they be allowed to work with radium then? What made them accept a job using it?
The radium was thought to be a miracle element at the time, the cure-all during the 1910s and 1920s. The girls would eagerly accept jobs and actually got their name from the locals and towns they worked in, who noticed the way they glowed when they walked home, hence Radium Girls.
Okay, I can accept that they had no knowledge of its harmful properties, but glowing wasn't a big concern. How did they begin to glow from being around radium?
The girls painted with the radium and would lick the brushes to make them easier to paint with, ingesting the radium in the process. It actually made the job much more popular. The glowing girls went to work functions often and had many suitors or beaux. It was a vastly romanticised job at the time.
So when did they realise that it hurt them, and how did the symptoms show up? It seems rather ideal so far.
It took between a year and, in one case, 8 decades for symptoms to show up. The girls would also have spent many years going between doctors to try and get a diagnosis for a previously unknown disease. It was completely fruitless until 1925, when Dr. Martland found a way to conclusively show that the girls were suffering with radium poisoning.
8 decades, that's a long time to not notice what I'm sure are pretty bad symptoms.
Yes, however, these symptoms were often very similar to necrosis or other bone and joint issues. Many of the girls spent lots of time at dentists or physical therapists with bad pain and rotting teeth. This is due to the fact that radium as an element is very similar to calcium, which makes up our bones. So when it was ingested, the body deposited it in the bones, where it slowly broke them down.
You previously mentioned that in 1925, Dr. Martland was able to conclusively show that the girls were suffering from radium poisoning. But how did he do so, and did the area he specialised in help?
He was actually not a professional within this field at all. He was a medical doctor who had no history with radium, despite his own concerns about its use. This meant that he wasn't taken seriously when he proposed it, and many other doctors tried to disprove his theory, with no success.
Considering he wasn't a professional in this field, what impact did it have on the girls he diagnosed?
These girls were enraged about this act of medical negligence, and so they tried to sue the companies they worked for previously. This became an issue due to their diagnosis from an amateur and their status as women.
What was so problematic about this, considering the companies didn't know and would surely be forced to compensate for the gross misconduct as they should?
Sadly, the companies were completely unwilling to compensate and fought tooth and nail to cover it up. They started the settlements, where the girls had to not speak of it for a small sum of money, but over time they denied any responsibility for ruining these girls' lives, and there were no laws to protect the girls from this.
You said that this ruined their lives. Can we have a short list of how radium poisoning impacted these girls, so listeners can see just how awful it was?
Of course, they became infertile, lost all their teeth, their limbs shrank, their jawbone would decay and fall out. Many had weakened immune systems and contracted other diseases, as well as severe cancers developing. This is all explainable now, and we understand exactly what happened to these girls, but at the time there was very little scientific knowledge to explain any of their pain, which must have been just as infuriating as the symptoms were.
Okay, this is an awful end to their stories. Did they ever get any compensation?
Some of the girls never saw justice. They died before the cases were even brought to court. But 4 out of hundreds managed to win their case. This was still unsatisfactory, and the girls would spend the rest of their lives without adequate compensation and without justice, until the early 2000s, when they were recognised for what they went through.
Well, this brings us to the end of the Radium Girls and their story, but I have to ask, can this really all be put on a mistake? It seems that these girls suffered only partly due to mistakes in their workplace, but also partly due to the greed and apathy of the companies.
Well, we still can't say, as the companies never admitted their wrongs, and some are still operational today under different names. It started as a mistake and turned into a tragedy along the way due to negligence.
On that note, thank you for being here today, and I hope to have you again sometime for something slightly less morbid.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me today.
The next slot in today's podcast episode zooms in on one of the most dramatic moments in the history of a great city.
Indeed it does, and this time it's the turn of London, a city which has experienced more than its fair share of triumphs and disasters since it was first founded by the Romans.
That's right, and today's episode focuses on one of the more disastrous chapters in London's history.
Do you mean the Great Fire of London in 1666?
That's right, a momentous disaster which transformed London forever. Let's head over to the team to find out more.
Hello, in today's episode we will be talking about the Great Fire of London. This was a huge fire which quickly spread across London in the 17th century.
That's right, the fire started in the early hours of the 2nd of September 1666.
It started at Pudding Lane, in a bakery, when baker Thomas Fariner left his fire oven open.
Yeah, a spark flew from his oven and landed on a pile of lighter fuel.
In the area there were loads of newly built factories containing highly flammable objects, such as lighter fuel, wood and clothes.
There were heavy winds that came from the east that spread the fire throughout London.
The people were forced out of their homes and were affected for 5 whole days.
You all are probably wondering how the citizens survived 5 days without food or a home.
Well, they stayed in a field outside of the city during the catastrophe.
Over 13,000 houses and 87 churches were destroyed, along with St Paul's Cathedral, so the fire changed the skyline until it was rebuilt almost 20 years later.
After 5 traumatic days, the fire started to settle down. Charles II managed to slow the spread of the fire by blowing the houses up. Although this seems strange, it actually made gaps to stop the fire from spreading between the rows of the houses.
Christopher Wren tried to rebuild and design the new houses further apart from each other, unlike the last ones, but people didn't want the new houses that he designed. They wanted their old ones to be the same as their new ones.
So he decided to design and build new houses in the same location as the old ones, but this time they were made of red bricks and white stones.
This made the atmosphere of London a lot safer since all the houses were no longer made of wood, so it protected against any future incidents such as this one.
So, I think that this is the end of this topic. If you like this episode, then make sure you stay tuned for more amazing podcasts.
Goodbye for now.
Wow, that was really interesting. I found out a lot about that topic.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today.
Don't forget to tune in next time.
And like and subscribe. Bye!
Bye.